What's going on, guys? Today we are looking at UConn, the UConn Huskies, in their preview of the 2024-25 season. And Coach Dan Hurley is back for his 7th season after back-to-back national championships. Can the Huskies make it 3 in a row? And last year they went 37-3, 18-2, finishing first in the Big East. And they finished 13-0. They won their last 13 games after a double-digit defeat at Creighton, where Creighton just hit a ton of threes. And 11 of those 13 wins were double-digit wins, including all 6 tournament wins. So this was a very dominant run by the UConn Huskies last season. And throughout last year, there really, as far as I was concerned, were only 3 teams that I thought could win the championship, who had a high likelihood of winning the championship, right? It was UConn, it was Purdue, and then I thought Houston deserved to be in that group as well. Unfortunately, Jamal Shead went down in the game against Duke, so we never got to really see. They also had some other injuries during the season to rotation players that hurt their depth, whereas UConn and Purdue stayed healthy for the majority of the season. And UConn, after that Creighton game, really took it up a notch. And I thought in particular, Stephon Castle got a lot better towards the end of the season. He seemed to get more comfortable just as a player, right? He figured out his role, and then he started to assert himself a little bit more. I felt like early on in the year, he had an injury. He was playing in a team, that had just won a national championship with a lot of veteran players, and so he was kind of fitting in. Whereas towards the end of the year, he was more assertive, and also he was more confident with his jumper. And so you lose Stephon Castle, and you lose the big man in the middle, Donovan Clingan, who was just absolutely, I don't want to use the word dominant again, but he was a major deterrent around the rim, and that was very noticeable in the NCAA tournament. The game that really stuck out for me from Donovan Clingan was the game against Illinois, where they tried to take it at him early on, and it didn't work, and they didn't really change their strategy, and that was the game. I think UConn ended up on like a 30-0 run. It was like 50 minutes in between because of timeouts and maybe halftime. I don't remember exactly. Drop a comment below. But it was like 50 minutes in between times Illinois scored. Like, UConn was just outright dominant. And I haven't even gotten to 2 of their guys who I think were their 2 best and most consistent players, in Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer. Newton was just an all-around Swiss Army knife who did everything, had a couple of triple-doubles, hit timely shots for UConn, was their point guard. He was 6'5", so he gave them size to the position. And then Cam Spencer arguably was their best player, at least one of their best players, And he was a tremendous shooter, but he did a lot more than that for UConn. He was a guy who got timely deflections and steals, and he was also a guy who could find open players for UConn, an underrated passer as part of that team and playmaker. And so typically I wouldn't go so long reviewing last year's team, but this team was special. So I thought it made sense to spend a little bit more time, especially on those 4 guys who are not going to be coming back to UConn this season. And those are the 4 main guys who are gone from last year's national championship team. So who's back? Alex Caravan is back. Samson Johnson is back. Solomon Ball is back. Jalen Stewart and Hassan Diarra, among guys who played decent minutes. Obviously, Alex Caravan, that's probably the name that most people will recognize. He has been a starter for both national championship teams at UConn. I really thought, as a draft analyst, he should have come out for the 2024 draft, just because I thought he was a guy who should have been picked between 20 and 30. A great shooter, a good team defender, a guy who really understands how to be part of a team. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, can he play in a higher level role, because he's been a role player his first couple of years. Can he step up and be either a number 1 or number 2 option? I'm curious, will that happen this year? Samson Johnson has been the backup or third string center at UConn the past 2 seasons. He did a great job as the backup big with Donovan Clingan forming the 1-2 punch at the center position. This season, he will do that with one of the transfers that we'll get to in a minute. And the curious question for me with Samson Johnson is whether he will start or come off the bench. Either way, he'll play somewhere around 20 minutes, I would suspect. And then Hassan Diarra, he's going to be a 6-year player at this point. He's just a really steady guard that Coach Hurley can rely upon. And similar to Samson Johnson, I am curious whether he will start or come off the bench for the Huskies. Similar to Johnson, though, either way, I think he'll get substantial minutes for UConn. And then the two sophomores coming back from last year's team, Solomon Ball and Jalen Stewart. Solomon Ball got more playing time early in the year and faded towards the end of the season. More so because Stephon Castle was hurt, and then he came back into the lineup. So this is going to be a big year for Solomon Ball to establish himself as a potential starter, but more likely a consistent rotation piece off of the bench. And Jalen Stewart, I thought, really showed some nice flashes for UConn. He actually played a little bit more as the season went on. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit more. And I thought he showed some nice flashes as a guy who can play off the ball and just kind of like figure out his role within the team. And he has a chance to start this season, I think a little bit more so than Solomon Ball, mostly just because of his position as a forward versus Solomon Ball as a guard. And as we'll get into right now, there's a little bit more depth, in my opinion, at the guard positions than there are on the wing or forward spots. So, who's in for UConn? Well, they've got Aiden Mahaney coming in as a transfer guard. He's an off-ball guard, I would say, from St. Mary's. Mahaney had a really good freshman season and kind of I wouldn't say disappointing. The only reason I even bring up that word is there was high expectations that he could take a jump as a sophomore, and it didn't really happen. He didn't become like a bad player. He just was kind of similar to what he was as a freshman. So still a solid player. We'll see if Coach Hurley and his staff can get a little bit more out of Mahaney than he had last season at St. Mary's. Terrace Reed Jr. is going to be that center forming the 1-2 punch with Samson Johnson. And Terrace Reed, I think, is an intriguing big who has a little bit of range on his jumper. He can block shots. He can rebound. He's got good size. So I think that there's going to be some potential with Terrace Reed this season. Those are the two main transfers coming in for UConn. The only significant transfers as far as I know. And then they've got 3 freshmen that I think have a chance to make an impact this season. The first one for sure is Liam McNeely, who's a McDonald's All-American, the only McDonald's All-American freshman coming in this season for UConn. A tremendous shooter who played at Montverde with Cooper Flagg and company, and is a guy who I think can come in and immediately either start or be the 6th man for UConn, depending on how Coach Hurley wants to utilize him. Isaiah Abraham is, I think he's going to play more than maybe some people thought or maybe gave him credit for. I really liked what I saw from him in some of the later season games at Paul VI. I thought he's a big wing. He's like 6'7", so it's more of a position of need for UConn. I think there's a chance he can find himself some minutes. And Ahmad Noel, who's like a guard, I don't see him being part of the rotation this year, but I think he's one for the future for sure. So speaking of that projected rotation and starting lineup, I'm going to go with the starting lineup of Hassan Diarra, Aiden Mahaney, Jalen Stewart, Alex Karaban, and Samson Johnson. And I know that's going to be controversial. There's going to be people who definitely disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. This is just what I think Coach Hurley is going to start with. And then I certainly think there's a world where Liam McNeely and Terrace Reed end up being starters. And it just depends on how good is Samson Johnson, how good is Hassan Diarra. Can Aiden Mahaney play as a point guard? Because I think if he can, that opens the door for Liam McNeely to start with Mahaney. If he can't, then maybe McNeely takes Mahaney's starting spot. Because I think they're going to want the size with Jalen Stewart and Karaban in the starting lineup. but we'll have to see. And then I think Solomon Ball is the 8th guy off the bench as part of like a solid 8-man rotation, and Isaiah Abraham is the 9th guy in the rotation. I think the 8 and 9, as far as I'm concerned, are more or less maybe not in Sharpie, but maybe in pen or something like that. But the first 7, I think, can certainly be jumbled around, and there's not exact clarity of who's going to be the 5 starters of those 7 outside of Alex Caravan for obvious reasons. Lastly here, let's move into the schedule and predictions for UConn. So as of right now, I couldn't find any good information on the conference schedule, but I do have some of the high-profile non-conference games for UConn. So they will be in the Maui Invitational, and they start out with a game against Memphis, which I do think they should win. And then the next game will be either Colorado or Michigan State, which I think will be, if it's Michigan State, it's going to be a better matchup than Colorado. Colorado is missing had a lot of guys depart from last year's team. And then finally, if they were to advance to the championship game, it could be teams like Auburn or North Carolina, among others. They have a game lined up with Baylor. They have a game on the road at Texas. And then they have another non-conference game at Madison Square Garden against Gonzaga. So you're looking at potentially, I would say, 4 to 5 like high-profile matchups early on, and then a solid 6, good non-conference matchups overall. So just quickly, again, last year 37-3, 18-2 in the Big East. So predictions, I think in the non-conference portion of play this year, they're going to go 8-3. This is a team, unlike last year's team, which certainly had to fill in some spots. They got to replace a lot more from last year's team than they did the year prior. So I think it's going to take some time for some of these guys who, yes, they were on the team, like Jalen Stewart, Solomon Ball, even Hassan Diarra and Samson Johnson, but they're going to have bigger roles. And I think that's going to take some time to adjust. So 8-3 non-conference feels about right. But I think they will adjust, and Coach Hurley will get them into good form, and I think they'll be 16-4 in conference play. 2 games worse than they were last season. That might be a bit high, but I just, until proven otherwise, I gotta believe in UConn from what they've done the past couple of seasons. So that gives them a regular season record of 24-7. So guys, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about UConn heading into next season? What other teams would you like to see me preview? Please like this video, subscribe, all the great YouTube stuff. It helps grow the channel, helps with the algorithm, all that good stuff. You guys get the deal. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.